What is addiction? Addiction is derived from the Latin term for enslaved by or bound to. When your brain produces so much dopamine from the drugs it stops producing its own dopamine naturally and relies on the drugs to produce it for the brain. When this happens, it goes from being just a pleasure drug to a drug that needs to be taken to make your brain function normally. That's when you become addicted. The brain addicted. The ventral tegmental area releases the dopamine, which in turn affects the amygdala, nucleus accumbens, prefrontal cortex, and the hippocampus. All of these areas of the brain affects things such as emotions, body's motor function, attention and planning, and your memories. Depending on the drug addicted to, there can be long-term effects that can haunt the abuser for a very long time. Drinking and drugging in American literature. A great example in American literature of addiction and its effects on the body and mind would be The Swimmer by John Cheever. In this story, you see a man so lost in his addiction that he forgets the reality around him, spends his time swimming in people's pools throughout the neighborhood while thinking that everything else in life is just fine. Throughout the story, he thinks everything is okay, though his mind is so lost that he forgets that what is actually happening. He seems to swim aimlessly throughout the seasons, getting colder and colder the more he swims. Big Blonde. In The Big Blonde by Dorothy Parker, you are given a story where a non-addict becomes an addict because of an addict. I know it sounds crazy, but that's what happened. In the story, Hazel is married to Herbie. Herbie is a man who could drink. Though Hazel found this amusing, it would eventually lead to her own addiction because she struggled with her husband's addiction. Bactine. In Bactine by Donald Ray Pollock, you have a very interesting story about a man who absolutely hates the drug that he is doing. From the taste to the smell makes him nauseous. He comes off his high knowing that he doesn't want to do it again. Thanks to horrible normality, he waits his turn to huff out of the bread bag one more time at the end of the story. Blessed. In the story Blessed by Donald Ray Pollock, the main character comes into contact with a high-end thief named Tex Coburn. While doing jobs with Tex, he ends up falling off the roof and severely injuring himself. After his injury, he ends up becoming addicted to Oxycontin. This in turn changes his whole life. While addicted, he becomes mean and distant from his family, so much so that he didn't even know that his son was able to talk. Towards the end of the story, he comes to realize that he has an addiction and talks about walking away from it, but the pills just have too strong of a hold on him. Bringing Belle Home. In the story Bringing Belle Home, you have a very interesting love story where two addicts, Thompson and Belle, have a very difficult relationship. Thompson is a mean fucking drunk, and Belle is a drug addict. These two end up getting married, but the tension between them ends up being too much and their lifestyles fall apart. They once again end up in a bar together when their whole world falls apart between them. Belle lies to Thompson about sleeping with his son, which in turn has Thompson grabbing her by the throat. Once the police arrive, things start getting even more tense until Thompson is eventually arrested. After all this, she reveals to him that it was all a lie to see if he trusted her. The way the addiction destroyed these two people in their relationship is truly a sad story. From real life to books and back again. Throughout these stories, we are given a window to what addiction can do to a person and the people around them. Though some of these stories are nonfiction, it does not take away from its mission to show the audience what goes on in the life of an addict. I mean, it's truly a no-holds-barred example of what drugs and alcohol can do to the body and mind. Celebrities and addiction. Too often we hear of stories in the news where an actor or singer loses their life because of an addiction. With their hard lifestyles, it seems that becoming addicted is an easy thing. With all the travel and lack of sleep, they turn to one of the few things that can help them cope: drugs or alcohol. Here we have pictured Heath Ledger, Prince, Amy Winehouse, and Chris Farley, all of which had lost the battle to addiction. Personal experiences of Steve and Chris. I venture to say that the vast majority of people out there have had some sort of interaction with addiction. Some people may not realize it, but if they would sit down and truly think about it, they could think of at least one person who had suffered or who was suffering from some sort of addiction. From a dad who drank too much to a friend who may have taken pills the wrong way to get high. The sad part about addiction is that it has consumed most of the world. Both Steve and I had our own experiences with addiction. Though two different experiences, neither is more important than the other. Steve's experience. I can remember drinking my first beer and a couple weeks later smoking my first bowl of weed. I like the weed, the beer not too much. I would start to drink just to get a buzz. I was 13 at the time. By the time I was 16, I was smoking marijuana every day and drinking on the weekends. I quit school when I was in the 12th grade. I was 18. When I was 21, I was drinking, smoking pot, and snorting cocaine every day. Finally, after several jobs, I landed a job that led to me to a supervisor's position. At 27 years old, being on the job for 3 years, I walked out. After 3 months of not finding a job and just doing drugs and alcohol, I gave up. I put a pistol to my head and fired. Nothing. Shot the pistol again. Nothing. Being the pistol was a revolver and both bullets fired fine when it was facing away from me, I just gave up and decided to change my life. First, I stopped drinking, then stopped snorting coke, and lastly, I quit smoking pot. I did all this by the time I was 30. I smoked my last joint on my 30th birthday. For 15 years now, I've been clean. I will have a drink 2 or 3 times a year, but that is all. Now I'm married, got my GED, own a house, new vehicle, and I'm going to LCCC to further my education. Chris's experience. Chris's story is one of those where he never struggled with an addiction personally. All his experiences are through other people. One of the most trying times that he had ever had in his life was when his brother was addicted to bath salts. It was one of the most difficult things that he had ever went through. Watching his brother fall off the deep end tore him apart. Bath salts is a very difficult drug in the human body. Keeps you up for days on end until you just crash wherever you may be. The toll it takes on your family and friends is probably the worst part of this horrible drug. One of the worst things that bath salts will do to you is turn you into this zombie-like creature. When you become so distant from your family that they end up leaving you, something has to give. Thankfully, his brother found his way out of the hole that he had fallen in. He's been clean from bath salts for 3 years now and finally has his life back on track. This experience, unfortunately, is one of the rare ones. He made it out of his hole that he had fallen in and never looked back. Conclusion. We have gone over what addiction does to your body and mind. Never is it the case that anything good comes from addiction. From American literature to the movies, drinking and drugging in America is a horrible epidemic. The bad thing is, throughout human history, there's always been something for someone to get addicted to. With modern technology and science, there's only hope that people can prevail over this horrible disease.